It was just after 7 when I noticed it. The first real crack in the story Megan had been selling me for months. I'd gone out to grab something from her car, figuring I'd surprise her by filling up the gas tank before morning. It was one of those small gestures I liked to make for her, the kind of thing she'd smile at when she found out. But the moment I opened the back door, I forgot all about the gas. There, lying casually across the seat, was a man's sports jacket. Dark wool, fine stitching, the kind of fabric you can almost hear when you run your fingers over it. On the chest, embroidered in clean, neat letters, were initials I didn't recognize. Not mine. Not any friends. Not anyone from her family. The jacket alone might have been odd, but not enough to twist my stomach the way it did. What really caught me was the bottle. Half full. Expensive whiskey, not just a brand I wouldn't buy, but a label I'd only ever seen behind glass in high-end bars. The cap was loose, like it had been opened in a hurry, or maybe just set aside mid-conversation. And then the air. I leaned into the car, and there it was, a faint trace of cologne. Not mine. Not even in the same universe as mine. This was sharper, richer, the kind you catch a second too late in a crowded room and wonder who walked by. The smell clung to the upholstery like it had been there for hours. I stepped back and closed the door slowly, my mind already working through the possibilities. Maybe she'd driven a coworker home. Maybe she'd given a client a ride. But Megan had told me earlier she'd been in meetings all day, just meetings. No late appointments, no client dinners, no stops on the way home. When I came inside, she was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she rummaged through the fridge. She looked up when she saw me, gave me that casual little smile she always did, like the day had been ordinary. Her purse landed on the counter with a soft thud. "Hey," she said, "what do you feel like for dinner?" "I'm starving." I studied her face for even the smallest twitch. A pause, a dart of the eyes, anything. "I saw a jacket in your car," I said. "Men's. Doesn't look familiar." She glanced toward the doorway just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, that must have been from work. One of the guys left it there. I think I gave him a ride last week." "Last week?" I asked. "Then why's it still there?" She shrugged and went back to the fridge. "Guess I forgot. I'll bring it in tomorrow." Her tone was easy, casual, like we were talking about a misplaced coffee cup. No flicker of guilt, no shift in her voice. And maybe that was what bothered me most. How smoothly she said it. I could have let it go right there, but my mind kept looping back to the details. The jacket looked freshly pressed, not something forgotten for a week. The whiskey, expensive, deliberate, didn't fit into a forgotten item story. And the cologne, that wasn't the kind of scent that lingers after days. Still, I didn't push. There's something about being caught off guard that can freeze you in place. You tell yourself you'll bring it up later, when you're less rattled. But the truth is, you're not sure if you want the real answer. She started talking about takeout, Thai or pizza, as if nothing had happened. I nodded along, the words barely registering. I watched the way she moved, still in her work blouse, hair slightly tousled like she'd been in the wind. She laughed at something on her phone, the sound light, unforced. And there I was, standing a few feet away, feeling like the floor had shifted under me. Later, while we ate, she told me about her meetings, the same vague summary she always gave. A couple of deadlines, some back and forth with the new marketing guy, the usual office politics. She even rolled her eyes in that familiar way when talking about her boss, like we were in on the same joke. If I hadn't seen the jacket, if I hadn't smelled the cologne, I might have believed every word. After dinner, she curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, laughing now and then at whatever she was reading. I watched her from the armchair, my mind elsewhere. I kept telling myself I was overthinking. People leave things behind in cars. Smells linger. Expensive whiskey could have been a gift. But every time I tried to settle on that, something inside me pushed back. It wasn't just the jacket. It was her reaction. How quickly she had an answer ready. How smoothly she changed the subject. How she didn't seem surprised at all. When I went upstairs later, I heard her on the phone. The tone was softer, warmer than the one she used with friends or coworkers. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm, a kind of easy back and forth, the kind you have with someone who knows you well. The moment my foot hit the top stair, her voice dropped. She ended the call a few seconds later. That night, lying in bed, I could still smell the cologne in my head. I told myself it was nothing, but I also knew better. People don't leave expensive whiskey half-drunk in someone else's car. They don't forget their tailored jackets for a week without asking about them. Megan slept easily beside me, her breathing slow and steady, like she had nothing to hide. But for the first time in a long time, I couldn't match her calm. Something had shifted between us, even if I couldn't name it yet. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the last time that feeling would come back. It had found a place inside me, and it wasn't letting go. I didn't sleep much after the jacket. I lay there listening to the digital clock breathe in red slashes, feeling the night stretch like taffy. Every few minutes I'd drift toward a soft, ordinary thought. Tomorrow's grocery list, an email I needed to answer. Then the memory of that cologne would flare and wake me clean. Megan turned once, touched my shoulder as if she'd been dreaming of me, then rolled away. I envied how easy it seemed for her. In the morning she was bright, almost rehearsed bright. She kissed my cheek, said she had an urgent project, then laughed at herself for calling every project urgent lately. I watched her gather her phone, charger, the tote with the gold zipper, everything into tidy stacks. She's always been neat, but this was different. Her phone never left her hand. Even when she tied her hair, she tucked the phone between her shoulder and cheek like it was part of her. The day became a collage of small, new things. Messages she typed with her body angled away. The way she smiled down at the screen, small and private. The lock screen switching from a 4-digit code to Face ID. When I asked if her team still planned the quarterly offsite, she nodded without looking up, said, "Totally," and then left the room to take a call from Ava, a coworker I'd met once and couldn't imagine making her laugh like that. I started clocking the late returns the way you count breaths when you're trying not to panic. Monday, 9:40. Tuesday, 10:15. Thursday, almost midnight, with a text at 8:07 that said, "Running over? Don't wait up," and a confetti emoji. She used to send photos of her desk clutter, cold coffee, pastel sticky notes, but now it was only words, polished and vague. The new perfume appeared in our laundry like a stranger's thumbprint. Not the jasmine I'd picked for her birthday. Not the citrus one she wore when she traveled. This was heavier, warm with pepper, the kind that insists on being let into the room. It clung to the collar of a black blouse I didn't recognize. When I checked the tag, I realized I'd never seen that brand in our closet before. On Saturday, she announced errands. She said it lightly, like an invitation I wasn't supposed to accept. "Dry cleaning returns, that plant store on King," she said, already sliding her keys into her pocket. "Do you want anything?" I asked if she'd take the old comforter to the donation bin. She nodded, kissed my forehead, and was gone. I stood in the driveway a full minute after her taillights disappeared. The quiet felt like something you could hear breaking. In the trunk of my car sat the comforter, folded and ready. I placed it on the porch bench instead and went back inside, not sure whether that counted as lying to her or protecting myself. That night she said she'd meet the girls for wine and karaoke. "All ballads all night," she joked, swiping gloss on in the hallway mirror. She wore a dress that made strangers look twice and a pair of earrings I'd bought years ago on a whim. She hadn't worn them in months. I told her she looked amazing. "It's just the eyeliner," she said, teasing, and she was gone before I could ask who was driving. Around 11 I tried to sleep. At 1, I texted, "You good?" A minute later, "Yes, don't wait up. Love you." The text read like it had been edited by a committee to sound normal. At 2:30, I gave up and made coffee. At 3:06, the door eased open and she came in on the careful feet of someone who hopes not to be seen. Her makeup hadn't smudged. The curl in her hair was still perfect. She smelled like the new perfume and something cooler, metallic, close to the cologne from the car. I asked how it was. "Silly and loud," she said, smiling in that practiced, cute way. She slid past me, her hand grazing my arm, and disappeared into the bathroom. The shower started. Through the door I heard her phone vibrate, then vibrate again. When she came to bed, the phone came with her, tucked under the pillow on her side. She never did that before. I told myself I was being paranoid. I also opened a notes app and started a list I titled Random. I wrote, jacket, whiskey, initials, cologne, face ID, new blouse brand, karaoke makeup intact, 3 a.m. Phone under pillow. I locked the note and hid it in a folder with a boring name, because even my suspicion felt like a shame I needed to tidy. The next week brought the urgent projects back with new urgency. She began leaving early, which she had never done. Even when she ran, she preferred evenings. Twice she mentioned a client in Charleston who came out of nowhere, the kind of whirlwind account that attaches itself to high performers. I asked questions to sound supportive. She answered like a person reading headlines she'd skimmed in line at a coffee shop. That client would come up again. I didn't know it then. On Wednesday, I took her car for an oil change. I told myself I was doing her a favor. On the way, sunlight cut through the vents and lit a constellation of dust. The cologne lived in the fabric, faint but patient. In the back seat, under a folded tote, I found a receipt from a bar I'd never been to, mahogany logo, heavy paper. 2 cocktails I didn't recognize, a neat pour of the same whiskey brand as the bottle. The date matched her girls' night. The signature wasn't hers. My name is a series of angles, this one looped. I photographed the receipt and replaced it exactly as I'd found it. On the drive back, the radio offered a cheerful song about second chances. I turned it off and listened to the engine. That weekend, she organized the junk drawer. I've learned you can take the temperature of a relationship by the junk drawer. Ours used to be chaotic in a companionable way. Now she sorted batteries into plastic sleeves, lined up paper clips, tossed old takeout menus in a flurry of competence. When I reached for a pad of sticky notes, she moved her phone on top of it, as if without thinking. A second later, she moved the phone again, farther from my hand. She started taking calls on the porch where the neighbors couldn't hear. She started using headphones for music when she cooked. When she laughed, it was never at the same time as the show on TV. When I asked what she was listening to, she said a podcast and named the one she used to love. Only the episode she mentioned had come out months ago. I know because I checked. A small thing tipped me more than the rest. Sunday morning, she crossed the kitchen, handed me a mug, and brushed a hair from my shoulder. "You need a haircut," she said, cheerful. She said that to me 100 times, but something in the way she said it, like she was thinking of a different version of me that would please a different audience, made my skin go tight. I booked a haircut and didn't tell her. Felt like staking a claim. Near the end of the month, she came home with lilies, white and almost too fragrant. "For the table," she said, arranging them with a focus that kept her eyes off mine. I told her they were beautiful. She smiled in a way that didn't climb all the way to her eyes. That night, the lily's sweetness mixed with the pepper of her perfume and a ghost of the cologne, and I lay awake counting the blades of the ceiling fan. If you ask me when I knew, I'll say I didn't. Knowing is too clean a word. It was more like fog burning off, a little at a time, revealing the outline of a road I didn't want to see. The road ran straight through us. On the last Friday of the quarter, she told me the team might go out after a big presentation. "It's been intense," she said. "We deserve a break." She wore the black blouse again. I asked if she wanted me to meet them for a round. "It's late," she said, and kissed me quickly, already turning away. I watched her leave through the window and realized I'd stopped waving. I didn't follow her that night. I followed the list. I sat at the table with my random note and added, "Lilies, bar receipt, signature, Friday, presentation, no invite." I didn't know what I was building, only that it was heavier each time I touched it. Around midnight, the apartment upstairs turned off their music. The building went quiet except for the refrigerator settling. My phone lit with a photo from a friend at her company's group chat. Someone had posted a boomerang of champagne flutes and glitter. In the blur, a reflection in a window bent light into a face I recognized. Megan's smile was tight, not the one she wore for me. A man's shoulder cut into the frame beside her. a flash of dark wool and a hint of a monogram I could almost read. I put the phone face down on the table and let the room be silent. The next part of the story didn't happen that night. It happened in me in the way a yes turned into a maybe into a no. I wish I could say I confronted her right then, brave and clean. I didn't. I pressed my thumb to the corner of the receipt photo on my phone and watched it throb with that small, stubborn light, like a heartbeat you can't ignore forever. That was the week I learned how long a person can hold their breath without admitting they're underwater. By the time December rolled around, the unease that had taken root in me had grown into something I couldn't ignore. Every small oddity, the late nights, the guarded phone, the unexplained errands, had stacked into a wall between us. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was bracing for impact. Megan's company always hosted a lavish New Year corporate event. Normally, she'd be buzzing about it for weeks in advance, showing me her dress, joking about how she'd avoid the CFO's long-winded stories. This year was different. She mentioned it only in passing, claimed it was going to be more low-key, and that spouses weren't really expected. When I suggested I could still come, she didn't flat out say no, but her pause was long enough to feel like one. That pause told me everything. I didn't argue. I smiled, wished her a good time, and said I'd probably just watch the game at home. But in my head, a plan began to take shape. On the night of the event, I dressed casually and left the house an hour after she did, taking the long way downtown. The hotel ballroom was already glowing through its tall glass windows, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, people in glittering outfits moving inside like a current. I slipped in through a side entrance, blending into the crowd. It didn't take long to find her. There she was, in the center of the hall, laughing with a small group. The dress was new, a deep emerald green that caught the light every time she moved. Her hair was styled in a way I'd never seen except in old photos from before we were married. She looked radiant, but her smile wasn't for me. I lingered by the bar, watching. It was almost a relief in a sick way to see it so clearly. The man beside her, tall, well-dressed, unmistakably comfortable in her space, leaned in as she touched his arm. They looked like a couple from the outside. My heart pounded, but I didn't move toward them. Instead, I pulled the small remote from my pocket, the one I'd rented along with a discreet AV slot from a technician who didn't ask questions. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly for a presentation. A large screen at the front flickered to life. Megan's eyes turned upward with everyone else's, still smiling, until the first image appeared. Her, standing with the same man, his hand cupping her jaw, both of them framed in the soft lighting of a Charleston hotel lobby. The next image, them on a balcony, her head tilted back in laughter, his mouth close to her ear. Murmurs rippled through the room. People turned to look at her, their conversations stalling. My chest tightened, but I kept my eyes on her. A third image appeared, the two of them seated in a booth, their hands intertwined on the table. Her face in that photo was softer than I'd seen it in months. The room had gone silent. Megan froze. That confident, unflappable calm she'd used to brush off my earlier questions was gone. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. She looked for me. I know she did, and when her eyes finally found mine across the room, the color drained from her face. Someone near her whispered something. She shook her head quickly, tried to force a laugh, but it collapsed into a stiff, thin smile. She turned toward the man in the photo, who stood there pale and motionless. I didn't need to say anything. The images had said enough. I walked out before the lights came back up, before the room could find its voice again. The cold air outside hit like a wave, but it felt cleaner than the air I'd been breathing inside. I could hear the muffled sound of voices rising behind me. Questions, accusations, the hum of a scene unraveling in real time. As I crossed the street, I knew two things with absolute clarity. One, the life Megan had so carefully curated was collapsing behind her. Two, I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. The morning after the corporate event, the house was still. Megan hadn't come home until well past midnight. I'd heard the garage door, the hesitant click of her heels across the kitchen tile, the pause outside the bedroom door before she went to sleep in the guest room. She hadn't knocked. She knew better. When I woke, the winter light was cold and flat through the blinds. Megan was already up. I could hear the faint hum of the coffee machine downstairs, but no other sounds. No clinking of a spoon against a mug, no phone call chatter. Just that steady, mechanical sound, like a background track to the quiet war now living in our house. I took my time coming down. There was no reason to rush. She was at the table, hair pulled back into a low bun, wearing a sweatshirt I didn't recognize. She didn't look up when I walked in. There was a mug in front of her, steam curling into the air, untouched. Her phone sat beside it, screen dark, face down. I didn't sit. "I've been thinking," I said, my voice even, "about how much I've let slide." Her eyes flicked up briefly, wary, then back down. "Jason, I held up a hand. "No, you've talked enough. This time, I'm going to show you what I've been keeping to myself." Her fingers curled against the edge of the table. I set the first envelope down in front of her. It was thick, heavy with paper that had weight in more ways than one. She hesitated, then slid the contents out. Hotel receipts, time-stamped photographs, credit card statements with out-of-town charges, neatly highlighted. She flipped through them faster at first, then slower. The silence stretched. "You kept these?" she asked finally, her voice low. "For months," I said. "Every time you thought I was too distracted to notice. Every time you came home smelling like someone else's cologne and told me it was probably from work. Every urgent project that had you slipping out after dinner." Her hand hovered over the next envelope. "What's this?" "Messages," I said. I watched her face as she read. Printed text threads. Ones she thought had been deleted. Her words, clear and casual, making plans with him. The teasing tone, the in-jokes, the not-so-subtle references to nights in Charleston. In one, she joked about how gullible I was. In another, she wrote about counting down until they could spend a full weekend together without the risk of me calling. A muscle in her jaw twitched. "You went through my phone?" "No," I said. "I didn't need to. You've been sloppy for months. The receipts, the timing, the outfits that didn't match the story. They all told the same truth. I just decided to stop ignoring it." She tried to look angry, but the edges of her expression kept breaking. In the third envelope, I had the audio files. Transcripts clipped neatly to the CDs, each page labeled with dates and locations. Snippets of overheard calls. The ones she'd taken on the porch, voice low but not low enough. Laughing, complaining about her boring home life, promising to make it worth his while next time they met. Megan slid the papers back into the envelope but didn't push it toward me. Her eyes were on the table now, somewhere in the grain of the wood. "How long have you had this?" she asked. "Long enough to know you weren't going to stop," I said. She didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me I'd crossed from suspicion into certainty months ago. I'd just been pretending there was still a middle ground. I leaned on the back of a chair, keeping my voice steady. "I didn't show you this last night because I wanted you to have one more morning where you could pretend you still had control. But it's over. You don't get to hide behind your calm voice and quick subject changes anymore. You don't get to make me feel crazy for noticing what you were doing." Her shoulders slumped slightly, like a puppet whose strings had loosened. "You've been planning to leave me?" she asked, almost too quietly to hear. I shook my head. "No, you left a long time ago. You just didn't bother to take your things with you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock in the kitchen ticked too loudly. Then I said, "I'll make this simple. You're going to pack what's yours and leave by the end of the week. No scenes. No games. You've already had more of my time than you deserve." Her eyes flashed then. Not sadness, but something closer to indignation. "And if I don't?" I almost smiled. "Then I use every single thing in these envelopes in court. Every receipt, every message, every photo. And I make sure they land in the hands of the people who were in that ballroom last night." Her lips parted, but nothing came out. I gathered the envelopes back into a stack and set them on the counter. This is me being generous, Megan. Don't mistake it for weakness. I left her there, still staring at the mug of coffee she hadn't touched. Upstairs, I closed the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands weren't shaking, and my chest wasn't tight. The dread that had been riding me for months was gone, replaced with something quieter and heavier. The knowledge that I'd taken back the ground I'd been losing, inch by inch for too long. Downstairs, a chair scraped against the floor. Drawers opened. The soft, uneven sound of someone moving without knowing where to start. I didn't go back down. Not yet. The rest of the week would be messy, but it would also be finite. And that was something I could live with. The day of the hearing, the city was locked in a brittle winter cold that made even the courthouse steps feel hostile. I arrived early, not because I wanted to be there any longer than necessary, but because I wanted to choose my seat, to own the space before she walked in. My attorney, Miller, was already waiting inside, flipping through a leather folder that looked like it had been assembled for a war crimes tribunal. He glanced up, nodded once. "You ready?" I told him I'd been ready since the night I smelled cologne in her car. We went over our strategy again, not because I didn't know it, but because repetition was a kind of armor. We weren't here to argue feelings. We were here to argue facts, and the facts were a wrecking ball aimed directly at the narrative Megan would try to build. The bailiff called our case, and we stepped into the hollow, echoing quiet of the family courtroom. The judge sat high above, flanked by two flags, her eyes sharp but unreadable. Megan was already there. She wore a dark suit that was almost severe, her hair pulled back so tightly it looked like a challenge. She didn't look at me. She was busy leaning toward her lawyer, whispering in the way people do when they want to seem calm but are actually clinging to the edge. When the judge asked for opening statements, Miller's voice was steady, almost conversational. "Your Honor, we will show a pattern of deliberate deception over a sustained period. We will present financial records, photographic evidence, digital communications, and eyewitness accounts that confirm repeated acts of infidelity by Mrs. Carter. This is not a matter of suspicion. It is a matter of record." Megan's lawyer tried to counter with a claim about misinterpretation and context, but the judge's slight tilt of the head told me she wasn't buying it. Miller started with the timeline. Receipts laid out like mile markers on a road she had built herself. The Charleston hotel bookings, the boutique restaurants far from her office, the gas station charges in towns she had no reason to pass through. Then came the photographs, projected onto a screen so large there was no looking away. The ones from the corporate event were bad enough. The ones from the balcony, the dim restaurant booth, the parking garage, those had the air out of the room. "Your Honor," Miller said, "these images were taken on separate occasions over a 5-month period. The male companion is the same in each photograph, a colleague of Mrs. Carter's. He is married. He is not present here today." The judge made a note without looking up. Next came the messages. We had them printed in full, but Miller read certain lines aloud, letting each one settle before moving on. "Can't stop thinking about last night. We should do Charleston again soon, you know why. Don't worry, Jason's clueless." Every time my name came out of her mouth in those messages, it was like being in two places at once. The man in the courtroom and the ghost of the man she mocked when she thought I'd never hear it. Megan shifted in her seat, jaw tight, eyes darting to the papers in front of her. Then came the audio. Short clips, each no longer than 30 seconds, just long enough to strip away deniability. In one, she laughed about playing the good wife at home while planning her next overnight. In another, she complained that I was too predictable to ever suspect anything. The room was silent except for the sound of her voice, recorded without any of the polish she'd tried to put on it here. When it was Megan's turn, her lawyer tried to pivot, painting her as unhappy but misunderstood, saying she'd sought comfort in a colleague, but that it was never her intent to destroy the marriage. He even tried to argue that my collection of evidence showed I had invaded her privacy. The judge cut him off. "Counselor, your client's privacy is not on trial here. Her conduct is." I didn't look at her, but I could feel the heat rising from her side of the table. Miller wrapped up with the most brutal exhibit. The video clip from the corporate event, the one where she stood in that green dress, unaware that her curated image was about to shatter. The judge watched it through without a word, then closed the file in front of her. "I have heard enough," she said. Her ruling was quick, decisive. Megan's request for alimony was denied outright. The house, the car, and the joint accounts were awarded to me. She was ordered to cover a portion of my legal fees due to her actions being the direct cause of the dissolution. Megan's lawyer whispered something, probably about an appeal, but the judge anticipated it. "Mrs. Carter, you may appeal, but I caution you, the evidence here is overwhelming. Any further proceedings will likely result in additional costs to you." When the gavel fell, the room emptied quickly. Megan stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the table like it might offer her a different outcome if she looked hard enough. I stood, gathered my things, and walked past her without breaking stride. The closest I came to speaking to her was the faint scrape of my chair across the floor. Outside, the air was sharper than when I'd gone in, the kind of cold that made every breath feel earned. Miller handed me a copy of the judgment, the paper still warm from the printer. "It's done," he said. I nodded. "No, this part's done." Because what was left wasn't paperwork. It was the work of rebuilding, the slow, stubborn process of reclaiming my life from the wreckage she'd made of it. I didn't look back at the courthouse doors. Whatever expression she was wearing, it wasn't mine to carry anymore.